Metavision, the ocular ability introduced during the Neo-Egoist League of Blue Lock. Using your peripheral vision to constantly give yourself an endless stream of information, you can use that overwhelming mass of data to calculate the most optimal point that nobody else has grasped yet. Viewing the field from a higher dimension, a fourth dimension, so to speak, that transcends the 2 and 3 dimensional thought pattern. Today we're going to be ranking all Metavision users in Blue Lock. The main basis of this list is how well the characters can read the field with their Metavision, obviously using the ability offensively, defensively, stealing the ball, intercepting shots. Some characters have extra abilities or unique traits that aren't quite fitted to this criteria or aren't intrinsic to Metavision, which I will touch on when it becomes relevant. At the bottom of the list we have Rayo, who is noted by Isagi to have started using Metavision unconsciously after he stops Noel from stealing the ball. Both Isagi and Rayo don't have the physical ability to keep up with Kaiser and Chris, but due to both of them seeing their movements, they were able to intervene to some extent, with Rayo diving in at almost the same time as Noah. We see Rayo's Metavision activate during a few points in the Manshine vs Bastard Moonshine game. After Yukimiya's shot was blocked by Chris Prince and Rayo obtains possession of the ball, he's noting the positioning of movements of all players on his team, that being Chris Prince and Chigiri running, Agi's positioning, and using them all as pawns to get the ball to Nagi. It seems like Rayo is just focusing on his teammates here and is primarily using it to get the ball to Nagi, but he's seemingly only dialed in on his players or the players on his team, as he doesn't notice Isagi come up from his right and cut off his pass to Nagi. So while it is good, it is somewhat inconsistent as well. We also see his Metavision present as Rayo is the one who's in the position to receive the loose ball blocked by Kaiser. However, this may be more so due to luck, since Rayo notes even the gods are on my side. Regardless, his Metavision was still active. Probably the best feat though for Rayo's Metavision is reading the trajectory of Yukimiya's shot that even Kaiser didn't know Isagi was going to pass to, with Isagi himself also just noting that he didn't think Rayo would be able to be there and try and block the shot. So while his Metavision is good, the fact that Rayo isn't even consciously using it, which makes his performance with it very variable as we discussed, and not quite as good as the other people above him, I can't really put him higher than other characters on this list. I mean, he's not even using it in the Barcha game, which maybe it wasn't necessary. Doesn't really change the fact that it's kind of inconsistent in its nature, how it's used, and Rayo actually just using it in general. At the number 7 slot, we have Nico. Now, Nico played for Italy's Ubers. Nico having Metavision shouldn't be a shock, since his spatial awareness was always very prudent, with his Metavision making its debut when Nico was able to kick the ball away from Isagi, predicting his movements in response to Ryu's heading. The issue with Nico is that he isn't fully aware of his Metavision, at least initially, doing it unconsciously similar to Rayo. The difference between Rayo and Nico is that Nico is more conscious of Metavision and actually does use it consistently, with Nico actually using Isagi's movements as nourishment to awaken his eyes and brain during this match. So you have one guy who is on and off with Metavision to the point that his performance, while good, isn't really replicable, compared to Nico, who, and we're going to talk about the drawbacks in just a second, is able to replicate it and does just use Metavision going forward. The problem with Nico, however, or what separates Nico, is that his Metavision is a bit too focused. In the game against Bastard Moonshine, Nico notes that he just kept Isagi's movements and the ball within his FOV, following Isagi with his eyes, then found the spot that looked dangerous and tried to charge in and ignored his own team rules. While it did serve him well in the moment, this is kind of a double-edged sword, since his Metavision or MV that he uses is too concentrated on predicting what came next and focusing way too much on Isagi and the ball, completely unaware following this that Raichu was positioning himself behind him, which is why Isagi moved in early to narrow Nico's FOV. Isagi says it best: the way Nico is using his eyes and brain are still second rate and lead him to missing crucial info. Nico essentially is just too locked in on individuals and the ball and isn't at the point to where he's perceiving the entire field from a fourth dimensional view as a whole and dialing in on everybody's off the ball movements. Nico does have some good showings with it though. For example, we see that Nico is able to make passes based on his FOV or field of view, looking at his surroundings, which offers greater support, especially in the midfield, to someone like Lorenzo. Furthermore, we actually do see that Nico was able to intercept the ball before Noah was able to grab it, although this can be kind of iffy since he directly notes this was also part of Snuffy's design. regardless, still a pretty W feat. In terms of metavision use, I think there's more here to say that Nico would be above Rayo, but not really stand up to anybody above him. At the number 6 slot, we have Aiku. In the same game as Nico, Aiku is also confirmed to have metavision, appearing and cutting off Isagi from Corona lobbing the ball over Rayo. This being a far better feat than what Nico has, since it's presented as a much more complete version of metavision, with Aiku being completely outside of Isagi's calculation. There is Aiku's other abilities where he's able to pull up information on other players, or in the case of Isagi, he's able to note that Isagi has a 40% chance of shooting from his left leg, which he isn't as dominant with. Obviously, it's not his dominant leg, but he could still shoot from, compared to 100% on his right. This being something present in the U20 game when, for example, he had a 0% chance of beating Rin, which went up to 50% once Flow State Shido was in the mix. For the sake of this video, I'm not going to be including this when judging Aiku on his metavision, since it is kind of displayed as a separate ability from metavision itself, as this is something he had even in the U20 game before he actually had access to metavision. I think in conjunction with his metavision, he could be much higher on this list as a player, just to keep some sort of consistency for the video. Now, getting back to metavision feats, we have showings like Aiku dashing in front to cut off Kaiser's shot course, along with Ryu forcing Kaiser to make a Kaiser impact bounding, with Aiku also appearing on Isagi after intercepting Nico's pass to Lorenzo, although again, this feat can be partially attributed to Snuffy's plan, as Aiku was supposed to go into recovery mode when somebody was covering Snuffy, but to give credit to Ubers and Aiku, they did anticipate the plan that Isagi had just ad-libbed. So Aiku just has a string of good showings where he'll usually end up where the ball is going to be off of his metavision. Again, we see this when Aiku was able to header the free ball that Isagi was planning to steal. Mind you that Aiku was actually right next to Lorenzo when this ball was blocked, but he still ended up near Isagi and actually heading the ball. So the difference between Aiku and the people below him is pretty blatant, at least in my opinion, and I think he could definitely be higher as a player if you just take in his other abilities, but we're not doing that for the sake of this video. At the number 5 slot, we have Karasu. Now, Karasu's kind of the weird odd one out, since I think he can be a little higher or a little lower, depending on how much stock you put into his feats. I think it's easier to just explain why Karasu is here and then explain why he's not higher in the next section. Starting off, we actually have really good defensive uses of Karasu's metavision, such as when Karasu blocks Isagi's 2-gun volley, which is very important since this is when Isagi and Kaiser were both synchronizing and becoming this unstoppable unified force, followed by Charles also blocking Kaiser impact off the air ball, with both Karasu and Charles being noted to have anticipated the timing of their shots, both showcasing the metavision eyes. Karasu just noting if it's logical they can get there in time, even if they can't stop somebody they don't understand. This follows what we know, as Karasu earlier in the game was noted to be struggling to read the match, with Shido being locked down, Isagi having an awakening, and Kaiser making inexplainable moves. He just really wasn't able to understand the game. Furthermore, when Yukimiya joins the game, Karasu gives somewhat of a breakdown on Yukimiya's ability. Yukimiya's dribbling lets him slip through typed spots, with Bastard Moonshin getting a bigger boost in speed due to Yukimiya. He also notes, if I rush in, he'll give me the slip with his speed and technique. In this situation, the one I should go after and the one getting a pass is Isagi. This did end up being incorrect, but this still is a pretty good deduction on metavision, and the fact that he's using it or being able to keep pace with Bastard Moonshin at the end of the NEL is pretty impressive. Probably the last point for Karasu, as again we just don't see too much of his metavision in the actual game, is that he's able to cut off Hiyori's pass to Isagi during the final moments of the game, with Hiyori noting, if I can't surpass Karasu, a new egoist can't be born. You could interpret this to say Karasu's just better holistically. I don't really think this is the case. I think it's more so Hiyori overcoming the person who kind of incited his own ego, as there is a distinct flashback to Karasu's and Hiyori's introduction or first conversation with one another, and I don't really think it's enough of a basis to say Karasu has better metavision, or at the very least can be argued to be an entire tier above Hiyori. I don't really think that's the case, but I will acknowledge there are cases for Karasu. I think what separates him is that the characters above him just have more consistent showings, and the feats Karasu presents, like reacting to things or anticipating things that Charles could, aren't quite enough stock to just put him above everybody above him, at least in my opinion. It's really only debatable with the next tier up. Pretty much everybody after that, sure, not too questionable. So for these reasons, I think Karasu is at number 5 pretty confidently. Now, getting into Yori, we obviously have the Ubers game where Isagi and Hiyori's visualizations were key for Isagi to surpass Kaiser in goals. Charles, the two were sharing the exact same visualizations of the field. This is just noted multiple times, ranging from Yukimiya's pass not being to Isagi's feet, making the world of difference, or Isagi and Hiyori linking up by the end of the Ubers game where they aren't even looking at each other, leading to Isagi scoring a goal. This is congruent with what we see in the PXG vs Bastard München game as well. So during the entirety of the Ubers game, his just metavision is on par with Isagi's. In his match against the PXG, we see Yori block a shot from Rin while completely laying out Rin's strategy with Kaiser, Rin, and Isagi, all not anticipating Hiyori's interception, Isagi noting outright afterwards that Hiyori did anticipate everything that would have happened, and even saw a possibility that Isagi would have been outdone by Rin and moved into Rin's shot course. Hiyori being noted to have understand Isagi's FOV and moved that way because they shared the same visualization. More importantly though, and where the stock kind of comes from, is Hiyori's interaction with Charles Chevalier. Now, it's likely Charles, before we talk about metavision, has some sort of vision for passing, as we see an audible click with his eyes, changing pattern, and him passing to Shido for a peak performance x peak performance goal. I am not taking Charles's passing abilities into account or this kind of segment of metavision, as that's separate to his metavision as a whole or some different ability. Same thing with Aiku, more so suited to passes that only Charles could physically make. Now, aside from that, we see Isagi confirm Charles has metavision, with Charles remarking that Hiyori has good eyes after he perfectly anticipated his pass interception. Yori remarks that he'll never be able to catch up with Charles' imagination while he's looking for chances if he can't outweigh him over small things like Charles stealing the ball from Raichi. Furthermore, even when Hiyori does predict Charles, he just notices he's always one step behind him, with Isagi directly noting that the whole field is just in the palm of Charles' hand. While Charles' metavision is good, we actually do see Hiyori crack Charles' contrarian thinking, intercepting his pass to Shido, noting normally nobody would take that shot, but your rotten personality loves such a tight course, with Hiyori noting, I figured out how to beat you, contrarian. Furthermore, right after this, we see Hiyori hit a no-look rapid cross with his metavision right to where Isagi was going to be, so he's able to also perform a peak performance x peak performance pass similar to Charles. The reason I kind of have Charles in a separate category from Karasu is just off of his showings with metavision, as he's much more consistent with it during the PXG game and has had it for longer, and is like, even when Karasu and him do both have metavision, Charles is still consistently more impressive. For example, I mentioned Karasu making excellent deductions about Yukimiya joining the field earlier, yet Charles is actually able to intercept Yukimiya's shot to the goal despite the fact that Yukimiya was using Predator vision and had just gotten to the field. So even by feats, Charles is just more impressive when both have more metavision, along with a lot more presence during the PXG game. The way it's presented, or it's shown in the match, Hiyori and Charles are more closely associated with one another in terms of metavision, with Karasu just kind of being there afterwards after unlocking it, able to keep pace but not quite having the feats to argue that he's above them, which is primarily why he's not on this tier. Again, I think he could be if you really want to glaze his feats, but I think Charles and Hiyori are more consistent in this regard. And while I could talk about the Ubers game and some of Hiyori's feats there, it isn't really as relevant since the PXG vs Bastard München game is a higher caliber of game, as every goal during this game is a result of peak performance x peak performance, with Isagi noting that the 100% individual skills we practice won't be enough to score goals in this den of demons. So it isn't actually as relevant to talk about the Ubers game, since a lot of people being compared here are kind of playing against each other in the PXG vs Bastard München game. The last little point I just want to touch on for Charles is he does have the feat of cutting off Corona's pass to Isagi, which he had set up to be a triple ad-lib, seemingly triple flow chemical reaction to what he had with Kunigami and Hiyori prior, but I'm not really the biggest on this. I think it's a good feat for Charles, but at the same time, Isagi directly notes, I thought the brat didn't care, so he was doing this strategy or was off the idea that Charles just didn't care about the game anymore since all of his courses to Shido were cut off. So I think it's a good feat, but I wouldn't use it as an end-all be-all, especially off of what's previously been established. At the number 3 slot, we have Michael Kaiser. Specifically, or the version I'm going to be using, is after his awakening in the PXG match, as previously Kaiser's metavision was the model Isagi used to develop his, and if you actually look at it, both Kaiser and Isagi pretty much were just on par whenever they both were using their metavision. Both were usually arriving to the same shooting point or just arriving to the same point defensively to block shots from opposing players. Like, how many panels are there of Isagi and Kaiser coming from opposite sides in front of a character getting ready to block their shot? It gotta be more than 10. I refuse to believe it's any less than 10. I'm mainly going to be talking about the version of Kaiser that is reawakened or reverts to zero, so to speak. So, you know, maybe awakened isn't quite properly the terminology. The earliest feats of this version of Kaiser, when he is in his peak performance and he's in a restrictive state is him and Isagi attempting to call forth a pass from Kiora, both putting themselves in position to receive it and put forth their optimal shots, but Kaiser ended up being chosen as the ball got launched backwards due to having too much backspin. And even in relation to Rin, wherever Isagi ends up, Kaiser is right there responding to Rin, so you just can't really separate the two. This obviously plays into Isagi telling Kaiser there's no telling when Rin will surpass their imaginations, and that the only way they can beat him is by teaming up and combining their high level logic, which can happen if Kaiser can't keep pace with Isagi in this regard, formulating new designs. These were the only dudes responding to Destroyer Rin who nobody else could really combat. It also makes sense that Kaiser would be in this spot since he's essentially replacing Hiyori or taking Hiyori's place that he was holding in the Ubers game in the PXG game, which is a higher caliber game. Again, I think it's pretty straightforward. Both Kaiser and Isagi are just noted to be thinking on the same level, right in the ideal spot to receive shots. So for the number 3 spot, I think it pretty clearly goes to the reawakened or reverted to zero version of Kaiser, the one by the end of the PXG game. At the number 2 slot, we have Isagi Oichi himself, the GOAT, the greatest. What more needs to be said? Isagi bounces off a lot of what I mentioned previously. I mean, anybody who knows Blue Lock and thinks of Metavision just thinks of Isagi. He's that guy when it comes to it. But what separates him from someone like Kaiser, let's say, is due to how Isagi's newer form of Metavision is him having awareness faster than anybody on the field. Meaning, if he can make a design faster than anybody, he will be the one who capitalizes on it first. I think this is represented really well in the PXG vs Bastard Moonchin game, as you see a lot of what Isagi learns during the NEL come into fruition, as he's actively placing people into categories based on their ego types, and furthermore reacting to the evolutions of every player on the field, such as Rin, who was just not, like, nobody could stop this dude once he was in his destroyer mode, had his crazy evolution. It was pretty much unstoppable. A good way to view Isagi is to compare him with Kaiser towards the end of this match. Pretty much Kaiser and Isagi were reacting to and creating plans on par throughout the whole field. The only difference between the two towards the end of the game was that Isagi treated Ness as just another piece on the board and reacted to his evolution, whereas Kaiser allowed his emotions or opinions of Ness to impact his level of play. Hiyori says it best, in my opinion. Nobody else on the field, including him, could expect or believe in the genius known as Ness having a sudden awakening. The only person to believe in him equally and ran there faster than anybody else to adapt was Isagi. Rin's monologue on Isagi perfectly sums it up as well. Isagi has the charisma to draw out others' egos and exploit them for his own goals. Controlling hope and despair, the neo-egoist, he's Blue Lock's Demon King. This is also a nod to earlier in the match where Isagi remarks that in this last match, this is the den of the demons, and Isagi is inciting and controlling everyone's evolution and egos, making him the Demon King of Blue Lock. With his new awareness, it's pretty clear that Isagi's Metavision is just a step above everybody else. It's just ridiculous. He's just going to be reacting to people faster than anybody else on the field, or will be able to adapt and systematically place them into categories to where he can get to that point. So number 2 is Isagi absolutely free. At the number 1 slot, we have Mark Snuffy, the master of Team Ubers, known for its intelligence being comprised or composed of tactical nerds. During the match against Bastard Moonchin, we see Snuffy appear before Isagi, snatching the ball away after Isagi's Metavision transcends the charge led by Nico, who also has Metavision, and Lorenzo's zombie dribble in the midfield. This leads Snuffy to praise Isagi by complimenting his eyes, with Isagi noting that Snuffy had moved in to save the ball before it was stolen, with the Demon King remarking he out-meta Isagi's Metavision. Furthermore, Isagi notes that it isn't Kaiser, him, or even Noah who has a clear grasp of the field's future. It's Snuffy. The chapter statement also remarking, controlling the game the second he stepped onto the field, Mark Snuffy has only just begun displaying his tactical brilliance. It's noted that Snuffy is able to surpass Isagi's Metavision due to how he concentrates on surveillance, so all of Isagi's egotistical moves were easy for him to read. We never actually see Isagi outright beat Snuffy's Metavision, as he himself notes he can't predict the future when Snuffy is choosing from unlimited options, but rather due to Raichu's presence eliminating some of Snuffy's options, it's naturally going to restrict his attack pattern. So now is the question of, is Isagi's Metavision superior to that of Snuffy's? Oh, we don't know. Probably not, to be honest with you, since Snuffy's designs are still rooted in pro play, meaning he's performing all of these designs in a higher caliber or a higher scene compared to what Isagi does. So I wouldn't bank on it. I don't really think there's a case to be made yet that Isagi's Metavision is that crazy to the point to where he'd be able to dance on Snuffy like that. I don't really think so. You know what I mean? I don't think so at all. It's not even talking about all the stuff Noah saying regarding Snuffy as the best in terms of of cumulative skill. Ridiculous. For honorable mentions, we have a couple different characters. We have Itoshi Sei. It's pretty heavily implied that Sei has access to metavision. The main issue is we don't know to what extent. A lot of people lean into the idea that he has something like Charles, where he has, on top of metavision, a variation that is suited to making ridiculous passes. I think it's way too vague to say at this point in the series. We don't really know, since just skirting on the Blue Lock team that faced against U20 with Sei on there isn't really as much of a feat, and we just don't know exactly to what extent Sei's metavision is really at. It's also, or Isagi theorizes that Lorenzo might have it, but I think that's just inconclusive. We also know that Pablo has it from the World 5, but again, these are very few and far feats that they all kind of go in the honorable mention category, and I didn't really think there was quite enough to just give them a solid ranking. That's the video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. If you do like the Blue Lock content, definitely consider subscribing for more of it. If you like these type of videos, want to see me cover some other matchups or other video topics, definitely let me know down below, and I will catch you next time. Bye-bye.